Good morning. This is Zenko Paul Sakomizu. I was born November 29th, 1951 in Kyoto, Japan, and soon thereafter baptized Paulus, my baptismal name, Catholic. But I believe that in all major religions, each God is the same God. He just looks different to all different peoples of the world. He just looks different, but he is the same God. So whether or not I'm Catholic, Buddhist, Hindu, whatever religion, each and every single religion's God is the same God. He just appears differently to people of different races. In my lifetime, I have what you could call perhaps visions. I always thought of them as spiritual experiences, but perhaps I should say visions. And it all began when I was 4 years old. We were living in Wahiawa, in the central highlands of the island of Oahu, at that time called the territory of Hawaii. Hawaii became a state in August of 1959. But I was 4 years old, and one early evening, we were living on Plum Street, a small subdivision in Wahiawa. And that early evening, I let my brother sleep on the top bunk of our bunk bed, and I slept in the lower bunk. As I was getting into the lower bunk, I felt a presence. And I got up and turned to my left. Convention, social convention says, well, you always turn to your right or something like that. But no, I turned to my left. And there before me were my two guardian angels. Both were slightly taller than I was. One was slightly taller than the other one. And they both had long, very fair, long, blonde hair, plus white robes that touched the wooden floor. And they had no wings, no halos, but there was a soft glow around them. And they said to me, "Don't worry, Paul." At the same time, in one voice, simultaneously they said, "Don't worry, Paul." And I was born Paul Allen Takaki. But to be quite honest, I was a battered child. The abuse began when I was 3 from my father. But at the age of 4, he backhanded me in the face while I was sitting atop of his military footlockers. And he had come home one afternoon, and he just backhanded me in the face. And I suffered a bloody nose, and blood gushed out of my nose and spilled into the linoleum floor. And that was kind of like a play area. That same year, when I was 4, my guardian angels appeared to me, as I said, and said, "Don't worry, Paul." The years passed, and when I was 16 years old, we're living in Kailua. And Kailua is kind of it's a community on the other side of the Kola mountain range from Honolulu. Honolulu being the workplace of most people. Whether you own a company, or white collar, or blue collar, or whatever, or just doing labor. You usually work in Honolulu, and Kailua was on the other side of the Kola mountain range, and it's just a community that commutes each day to Honolulu, or goes to school at the University of Hawaii. And I was 16 years old, and we were living in, I believe it was 528 or 548 Pauakana Loop in Kailua in the Enchanted Lakes. And I started hearing these demonic voices, demons. There was no structure to the voice. It's just noise, for the lack of a better word. But it was so demonic. I called my mother to my room, and the voices were emanating from the upper right-hand corner of my bedroom door. And I asked my mother to come to my room, and I asked her if she could hear what I was hearing. Can you hear this? She said no, she could not hear it. So she told me to go lay down on my penay, which is kind of like a small, narrow bed. And I slept, and when I woke up, I felt something in my right ear, and I plucked it out. It was a black furry cane spider, and it was so repulsive. And my parents had built my bedroom as an addition to their home, and they had built in a door to the backyard. So I opened the door and threw the spider on the cinder block, and with the heel of my boot, I just killed that spider. But what it represented, what it truly represented, that black furry cane spider, I don't want to make subjective guesses. In other words, I don't want to make a guess about it, well, what it represented. My mother, for some reason, but that year when I was 16, I spent 3 days and 3 nights with 4-point restraints from an overdose of belladonna, which is a hallucinogenic drug that Vincent van Gogh, the famous painter who painted Starry Nights, also took, and became schizophrenic. So whether it was an audio hallucination, I don't know. But you please remember, when I was 4 years old, that I wasn't on drugs or anything, and my 2 guardian angels appeared to me and said, "Don't worry, Paul." That happened when I was 16, these demonic voices and sounds, and the next year my mother asked me to leave her home. I left home penniless, and this isn't to really wash dirty linen in public, but the sequence of events has to be made known. And I guess it was, I started living, I found a job eventually. I'd stayed with a friend, if you could call him that. I found a job in a nursery in a subdivision called Hawaii Kai in East Honolulu. And this is before Hawaii Kai was built. And I worked in a nursery watering bougainvillea plants, bougainvillea flowers. Now Hawaii Kai is built as a subdivision. It's kind of a small town, actually. And there are bougainvillea trees lining the streets of Hawaii Kai. But I worked there and then for a trucking company called American Pacific Transport, owned by Bob Lewis as a delivery driver. And I saved up enough money, and when I was 19, I flew alone to LA, and flew then on TWA flight, flew from Honolulu to LA. And from LA, I flew to New York. It was literally LaGuardia or JFK Airport. And from there, I flew to Casablanca, in a country called Morocco, on the northwestern tip of Africa. See, I flew from Honolulu to LA to New York to Casablanca. And I went up northward by train to Rabat, the capital of Morocco, and from there even further northward to to a town called City Kashem. And then I went inward to the cultural capital there called Fez. And spent a day in Fez, walked around the Casbahs, looked at all the brassware they had that they're famous for, brass tables, etc. And then I went northwestward to a city called Tangiers. It's pronounced Tangier there. Casablanca, the southern part of Morocco, was historically conquered by the Spanish. Therefore, you have the name Casablanca. The northern part of Morocco was historically conquered by the French. So the city, Tangiers, is actually pronounced Tangier there. But I checked into a small resort hotel called the Bristol Hotel, B-R-I-S-T-O-L Hotel. It was just a very small hotel, and it was owned by an Englishman. And I rented a room there. It didn't cost much. It was off-season. I think it was May of 1970 or 71 when I was 19 years old. In those days, you have to understand that after, shall we say, the euphoric days of the summer of love in 1967, that I took hallucinogenic drugs like LSD. That in Morocco, see, the Middle East is here. This is where St. Paul, and I am not St. Paul, the reincarnation of St. Paul. And Morocco is here, see, and Tangier is right there. And one mid-morning around, about 10 o'clock or so, I was walking into the lobby of the Bristol Hotel, and I was blinded by a white light, just blinded, and I was frightened, and I held on to the railing on the left-hand side of the stairwell going up, stairwell case going up. I held on to the railing, the banister of the stairs, because the blinding white light would lift slightly so I could barely see. And I made my way up to the second floor. They call it the second landing there. And it took me a long time to open up my hotel room door with the Benjamin Franklin, the European type keys, old-fashioned keys. But finally opened my door, and I laid on my bed, and this blinding white light lasted well into the afternoon, at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And every so often, the blinding white light would lift, and I could see the white linen curtains, or cotton curtains, blow inward from the breeze of the Tangier Bay, Mediterranean. That was my third vision. The first being my guardian angels. The second, actually it wasn't a vision. It was hearing demonic sounds. And then when I was 19, my second vision actually, when I think about it, unless you count the furry black spider, that wasn't even a vision, it was really there. But when I was 19, that blinding white light in Tangiers, Morocco, Tangier, Morocco, really did happen. Then the years passed, and I believe it was 1981 or 1982 that I began to hear voices intensely, and I had already been diagnosed as being a schizophrenic and manic depressive, bipolar manic depressive when I was 16 years old. I spent 3 days and 3 nights at Tripler Army Hospital, a psychiatric ward, as I explained. But my ex-wife had left me, and she claimed that my children weren't my children, and the anguish was so great that when she left in 1978, that about 3 years later, It developed into full-blown schizophrenia. I heard voices 24/7, every day of the week. And I was homeless every so often, as I had been when I was 17, when my mother asked me to leave her home. And I left home penniless. But in 1981, 1982, I was hearing voices just constantly. So I asked my friend at the time, Michiko, to take me to Japan, because I was born in Kyoto, Japan, the cultural capital there, in November 29, 1951. And I wanted to go back to Japan to die, because it was too much. I just knew I was crazy. See, so but what can I say? You know, I'm on medication. I do well. I'm cognizant. I can think. I can compose songs, write. You know, we flew into Narita International Airport and went northward on the Shinkansen, which is a Japanese word, or what they have named their bullet train, which is popularized in America as a bullet train since its introduction in 1964 at the World's Trade Fair in Tokyo. And we went northward to Aomori, and we did spend one night in Sendai, where the airport over there was inundated by the 3/11 earthquake and tsunami this past March 11th of the year 2011. And today's date is May 20th, Friday of the year 2011. And it's about 5:25 in the morning, pre-dawn hours. But then we went down on the west side of the coast of Japan and finally to Osaka, close to Osaka, I believe, to Himeji Castle. And to make a long story short, I asked Michiko to take me to a town called Otsu, because she had given me a book called Miyamoto Musashi. And it was about a legendary swordsman in Japan's history, historically in Japan. And he used two swords instead of one. And he had a love. Her name was Otsu, O-T-S-U, in Romanized English, Otsu. So I asked Michiko, please take me to Otsu, which is a town on the shores of Lake Biwa, the largest lake in Japan, because that's where I want to die. Otsu was their love between Miyamoto Musashi and Otsu, who played the flute, was never consummated. In other words, they never had an intimate, shall we say, moment. It was an unconsummated love. And we checked into it again. Not we, but, we did, but the first time in Tangier, Morocco, I checked in alone. I went there alone. But we checked into a small resort hotel in a town called Otsu when we arrived there. And I asked Michiko to go into the Fudo, which is a traditional Japanese bathtub. It's what the Californians got the idea for their hot tub. But when she went in, just to backtrack, when we were at Himeji Castle in Osaka, I had left the castle, which we were taking a tour of, and gone to a hardware store that I noticed when we were taking a taxi to Himeji Castle. And I bought a folding Craftsman type of razor blade, and it's kind of like a knife, and I had it with me. And there in Otsu, the town of Otsu, on the shores of Lake Biwa, the largest lake in Japan, I asked Michiko to go into the Fudo, and it's incessant, these insidious, these voices are too much for me. Just way too much, and I decided to commit suicide. And this is where I'll show you on my wrist. Just a minute. See? Here's the scars on my wrist. And I cut my wrist over and over again with that razor blade, the folding razor blade knife that I bought at the hardware store outside of Himeji Castle, outside the grounds of Himeji Castle. And blood finally gushed out of my wrist. And I've been laying on a futon, a traditional Japanese futon, covered with white sheets, and a traditional, I believe it was a type of Japanese pillow that's filled with rice husks, and a clean white pillow cover. And blood gushed out of my wrist. I lost consciousness, and I found myself in just a heaven-like world. And everything was lit by a soft white light, not a blinding white light like Tangier in Morocco. Everything was lit by a soft white light, and in front of me were a mound of impressionistic flowers